What if the greatest show on Earth, the Olympics, isn't just about world records and unity? What if behind the fireworks and the gold medals lies a pattern of corruption, exploitation, and crippling debt that lingers long after the closing ceremony? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the dark side of the Olympics. The deals made in smoke-filled rooms, the neighborhoods bulldozed for stadiums, and the bills that ordinary citizens keep paying for decades. Throughout this video, you'll hear stories that feel unbelievable. And you'll want to know who benefits, who loses, and what can be done to fix it. Stay with me, because later I'll reveal the one simple change that could make future games genuinely beneficial for host cities. The Olympics were meant to inspire, but inspiration doesn't pay the mortgages of displaced families, and it doesn't sanitize backroom deals that cost taxpayers billions. So let's look honestly at the promises, the profits, and the human cost. In a few minutes, I'll show how a single construction contract, awarded quietly, can ripple through a city's budget for generations. You won't believe how small a decision can be, and how large its impact becomes. The promise versus the price. When a city bids to host the games, the pitch is irresistible. Investment, global attention, and the promise of a renewed urban legacy. Hosts promise new parks, upgraded transport, and booming tourism. In public speeches, you hear words like revitalization and legacy, and citizens picture a brighter future. But here's the reality. The price tag of hosting rarely matches the promises. Budgets expand, contractors push change orders, and temporary venues become permanent financial burdens. The result is a mismatch between the vision sold to voters and the economic reality that follows. Later, I'll explain how the legacy stadium often becomes the most expensive ghost in a city's ledger, why it looks glamorous on the brochure but drains money for decades. Corruption, bribery, and backroom deals. The Olympics require scores of contracts, construction, hospitality, security, and more. Wherever huge sums flow, humans find ways to skim. Bribery and kickbacks have become recurring themes. Secret meetings, favored contractors, and opaque procurement processes. The complexity of organizing the games makes oversight difficult and gives powerful actors room to act without scrutiny. It's not just petty skimming. Sometimes institutional capture happens, meaning parts of the system are shaped to benefit specific corporate or political interests. Decisions that should be public are privatized, and regulatory safeguards are sidelined for speed or secrecy. The people who pay the most? Local taxpayers and the workers who build the venues. Coming up, you'll hear about how opaque contracts are written to look legitimate on paper, but hide clauses that guarantee profit to insiders. It's not always illegal. Sometimes it's just engineered to be unchallengeable. Debt and cost overruns. Few things are as politically tempting as promising new infrastructure, but the finance rarely goes as planned. Budgets balloon, unforeseen challenges compound costs, interest on borrowed sums accumulates. The result? Debt that outlives elected officials, sometimes hanging over a city for decades. The math is simple. Immediate construction costs are only the beginning. Long-term maintenance, operating subsidies for venues that never fill seats, and the servicing of debt add up. When tourism and revenue projections fall short, taxpayers, not private sponsors, are left to cover the gap. That once-in-a-generation event becomes a generational burden. Later, I'll walk through an archetypal financial timeline. How a $1 billion stadium becomes a $5 billion liability over 20 years. And why early optimism rarely matches long-term outcomes. Displacement and exploitation of workers. To make room for shiny venues and athletes' villages, cities sometimes clear neighborhoods, relocating families and small businesses. This process is often framed as urban renewal, but for those uprooted, it means loss of communities, history, and livelihoods. Compensation, where it exists, rarely covers the broader cost of social disruption. Workers who build Olympic projects also face risks: tight deadlines, informal labor arrangements, and unsafe practices when corners are cut. Migrant workers are especially vulnerable when they lack legal protections or face language barriers. The rhetoric of global unity rarely reaches the people who bore the physical labor. In a bit, you'll hear a voice, anonymized, representing someone who lost their home to a temporary Olympic village that never came to full use. That personal story will show the human dimension behind the headlines: corporate power and the commercialization of sport. The games are huge marketing platforms. Sponsorship deals fund a lot of the spectacle, but they also reshape priorities. When naming rights, corporate lounges, and exclusive access packages dominate revenue strategies, the event can shift from public celebration to paid experience accessible mostly to elites. This commercialization affects athletes too. Sponsorship exclusivity clauses, restricted access for smaller brands, and the prioritization of revenue-generating programming over less glamorous sports. The Olympics become less about athletic excellence and more about controlled brand exposure. Stay tuned. Later, I'll show how hospitality packages and corporate zones are sold at prices that exclude average fans, and how that contributes to public resentment. The environmental cost and false legacies. Big stadia, new roads, and temporary installations have environmental impacts. Carbon emissions, habitat loss, and resource use. Promises of green games often gloss over construction footprints or rely on offsets that don't always materialize. Sometimes temporary structures are built with planned obsolescence, creating waste rather than sustainable assets. A true legacy should be sustainable and community-focused. All too often, legacy rhetoric is a PR tool rather than a genuine plan, and the local environment and public spaces pay the price. In a few moments, I'll outline what a truly sustainable Olympic plan would look like. And it's much simpler and cheaper than what usually happens. Athletes, doping, and cover-ups. The athlete is the public face of the Olympics. But behind the scenes, there have been pressures, shady deals, and in some cases, institutional cover-ups regarding doping and rule violations. When the governing bodies prioritize prestige over transparency, athletes can become collateral damage. Their careers and health jeopardized for the sake of a cleaned-up scoreboard. Athletes who raise concerns sometimes face retaliation or silence. That's a moral failing in a movement that claims to champion fair play. Later, I'll quote a hypothetical exchange that captures the chilling effect of speaking out. The fear that keeping quiet will protect careers, while speaking up can end them. Fixes: how we make the games better. If the Olympics can be this harmful, can they be fixed? Absolutely. But it requires structural change. Transparent procurement. Online. Auditable tendering with citizen oversight. Smaller, rotating venues. Reuse existing stadiums and embrace regional hosting to avoid single-city overload. Binding legacy plans. Enforceable commitments for post-games use and maintenance with financial safeguards. Worker protections, independent audits, safe labor standards, fair wages and grievance mechanisms. Environmental accountability. Hard caps on emissions and mandatory reuse plans for all constructions. Public financing safeguards. Limit taxpayer exposure. Require guarantees that private beneficiaries shoulder proportional risk. These changes shift power away from opaque decision-makers and toward communities. The games can still inspire, but they must stop leaving others to pay for the show. At the end, I'll summarize the single most effective reform and how you, as a citizen, can demand it. The Olympics are a mirror. They reflect our best impulses: global cooperation, excellence, and shared joy. But they also reflect the systems we tolerate: closed deals, unchecked power, and short-term spectacle over long-term welfare. If we want the games to live up to their ideals, we have to insist on transparency, accountability, and human-centered planning. If this video moved you, do 3 things. Share it with someone who loves the Olympics. Comment with which reform you think matters most. And subscribe if you want more deep dives into the systems that shape our world. Most importantly, remember, big events don't have to leave big scars. They can be a force for genuine renewal if we demand it. Remember that single small change I promised? Here it is, a legally binding public legacy contract signed before the games that guarantees the use, maintenance, and funding plan for every major venue. It sounds simple because it is, and it would make the difference between a city that pays for decades and a city that truly benefits. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.